When the Michigan Wheat Program was formed, one of the first things we did as we got organized was to join the National Association of Wheat Growers, which is an organization of 21 states with their headquarters in Washington, D.C. And they're the spokesperson for wheat, whether it's on the Capitol Hill or whatever it is, and where we also deal with research issues, and also we're connected with the new National Yield Contest, which I think Chandler will touch on. So as we're getting Chandler mic'd up, Chandler Goule has been our Chief Executive Officer of NAWG since, well, it'll be almost 3 years, come the 1st of July. Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Chandler Goule, National Association of Wheat Growers CEO. Chandler.
Just a brief introduction. We're going to walk through policy. You know, the first things they always tell you when you get up in front of a crowd or in front of a large group, don't talk about politics or religion. So we're not going to talk about religion, but we are going to talk a little bit about politics and some policy. It's kind of hard to keep those two separated. Many of you know that we had our Commodity Classic meeting for the National Association of Wheat Growers at the end of February. That is our annual meeting where we come in with all of our different committees. Of course, Dave being our vice president. Currently, we've got Ben Scholes from Texas is serving as president, Dave Milligan as vice president from Michigan, Nicole Berg serving as treasurer from Washington State, Brent Shane is our newest officer, who is our secretary from Oregon, and then Jimmy Music, who is our past president from Sentinel, Oklahoma. The main activity that we do at NAWG, we are your voice in Washington, D.C., whether it's to talk to your member of Congress when y'all are not able to be in D.C., or whether it's for us to be down at the administration or over at the White House discussing different issues. What we're really going to be focused on for the next year is working on the 2018 Farm Bill. There were several big wins in there. You know, remember from the last Farm Bill, you had to make a selection between ARC and PLC that you had to stay with for the entire life of the Farm Bill. One of the flexibilities we were able to get in there this year was that you would be able to switch back and forth from year to year between ARC and PLC. And I'll talk about implementation. I had the opportunity to be with the Deputy Secretary at the end of last week, and I'll be meeting with him again next week to continue to talk about the rollout of these programs. As I know, you know, your winter wheat here in Michigan is starting to come up. I was in Maryland last week on a farm. Their winter wheat's up just a little taller, but then of course, depending on the weather patterns, you know, in the next 2 to 3 weeks in the southern part of the country, you know, a lot of crops are going to be going into the field, not necessarily just wheat, but our soybeans and corn and other things like that. So it's going to be important that the department continue to push forward with the rollout of these programs. For those of you who have looked and read through the regulations as they come out, there's a type of rule that can come out called an intermedium or intermittent final rule, meaning once the department USDA puts out the rule of this is how ARC and PLC, that's what I'm going to focus on right now. This is how that program is going to work. Once they put the rule out, it automatically goes into effect. Instead of us having to do another 30, 60, or 90-day notice and comment period. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't go back and make changes if, let's say, a county FSA office says this isn't really working right or really working well, or the software is not syncing correctly. Then the department can still come back and make changes, but that still allows us the ability to move forward with these programs. The rollout of these programs have been delayed because of the government shutdown, but I do know, I mean, having spoke to Deputy Secretary Sinskey personally, they are working very hard to make sure they have Title I and Title II. There were a lot of changes in the Title II conservation program made during this last Farm Bill to make sure that they get those out for y'all. We also saw increased funding for the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab initiative, and of course following Dr. Olson's presentation here of the importance of your flowering dates and being able to find disease resistance, whether it's through breeding programs, but also making sure that we continue to be able to fund land grants like MSU and K-State and other places that continue to look at better ways for us to increase our production and hopefully not overly increase our cost of production. We also were able to maintain the MAP and FMD. MAP is the Market Assistance Program, and FMD is the Foreign Market Development Program. These are the two main programs that the U.S. Wheat Association, our sister organization in Washington, D.C., uses. This is where they get money that they match from your commission money that goes into the U.S. wheat to continue to develop foreign markets. Right now, I know there's a big emphasis on Africa, Namibia, South Africa, and countries like that are becoming larger wheat consumers. And so I know that a lot of the money is currently going there. This is also a very important funding right now because of the fact that we pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other trade agreements, which I'm going to talk about here on a slide after I talk to you about the budget. So we worked for 3 years to put a farm bill together. We got it passed. We were able to maintain status quo. We were able to maintain important programs like crop insurance. We changed some of the authorizations between CSP and EQIP by combining those two. CRP, of course, as we go out further west, is a very important program, especially on the cost share that they have there. But just because the Farm Bill has been through both the House and the Senate chamber, and also has been signed by President Trump, does not mean that it is safe from year to year. Every year, every presidential budget comes out, and no matter if they are Democrat or Republican, every president seems to come in and want to cut the USDA and wants to cut the Farm Bill. So this year in the president's budget, there was actually a 15% decrease from the cuts from 2019, but they were still around $20 billion of discretionary funding. So that would be things like towards disease research, that would affect, of course, your extension, your land grants. Crop insurance is a permanent mandatory program. But what the budget also did, and this is the first time for this, is it would cut $61 billion over 10 years out of mandatory programming. So that means if we were to pass the current budget put forth by the White House, in 10 years, they would take $60 billion out of Title I, so your commodity programs, Title II, your conservation programs. They would take it out of crop insurance, and they would be taking money out of your research. So NAWG, along with the corn growers and soybeans and most of the major commodity organizations, have come out in strong opposition to the budget. We have already been up on Capitol Hill to talk to the Senate and House Ag Committees, as well as Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee on proposing a better budget or something that does not come after agriculture in order to balance the budget, since we have been able to put farm bills together that have saved actually the taxpayer more money each year than we've actually been spending. Trade is clearly the hot topic. If any of you had the opportunity to join us in Orlando at the end of Florida at the Commodity Classic meeting, every single person was talking trade, trade, trade. Matter of fact, I would say that trade was talked about more than the Farm Bill was. And you know, just listening to the presentation right in front of me, understanding that most of the wheat here in Michigan is milled locally. Actually, I passed one of your trucks today when I was driving up here. Trade is still affecting your overall price here in Michigan, even if you're milling it, most of yours here in Frankenmuth or down in Toledo. What we're doing on the global ring and also what's being done to us is still going to always affect our domestic price. The U.S., I still want to call it NAFTA 2.0. If the media is in here, please don't print that, because that upsets the administration. But that's really what this is. Instead, we decided to call it the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, so USMCA. I suggest not trying to say that after about 6 p.m. on a weekend. It's hard to get all that out if you're trying to have a conversation. But we know that Mexico and Canada are two of our largest major export markets. They continue to be. They are upset by the tariffs, which I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. But one of the major changes that we were able to get, that NAWG and U.S. Wheat Associates working together, some of you may know that if wheat moved north out of the United States into Canada, regardless of what your class and quality of your wheat was, it was automatically downgraded to feed quality the second it went across the border. So you were automatically given a discount. Canada was not in compliance with the World Trade Organization. That was discrimination against U.S. wheat. They were not treating our wheat the same as they would treat their own. This was fixed in the USMCA agreement. So now when our wheat goes north of the border, it will be treated the same as Canadian wheat, and your quality and grade will stay with it. We still have a component to work on up there for varietal registration, and we are in very close relationships and talking to the Canadian Embassy. They are in the process of starting to reconfigure what would be the equivalent of our FIGUS, our grain inspection. They are in the process of reconfiguring theirs, and that will be our opportunity for us to interject this variety concern that we have, that our program requirements they still have. The comprehensive and progressive, so CPTPP, I just still call it TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was the plurilateral agreement that the Trump administration pulled us out of as soon as they came into office. It was with 11 other Asian Pacific Rim countries. Many of them have a very fast and large growing middle class, which means they've got a bigger demand for protein. Japan and Vietnam being two of the most important countries in that agreement as for export markets for U.S. wheat. This agreement has been ratified, so what caused it to be ratified is if 6 of the 10 countries who signed it agreed to it, it would actually go into effect, and so that has already happened. So currently right now, if we look at the Japanese market, which is one of our highest revenue markets for U.S. wheat, our producers are already at a $15 per metric ton disadvantage to Australia and to Canada because they stayed in the TPP agreement. Now, with that said, we are working with Japan on a bilateral between the United States and Japan. We've had some very good news from the Japanese government, or MFAT, that they are interested in basically just taking the language that was in TPP and putting that in the bilateral with the United States. And so the message that NAWG and the U.S. Wheat Associates have been sending to the administration is basically, we all know how to get on our computer and copy, cut, and paste, and let's send that over to Japan and see if we can't get an agreement done, because right now, again, we are at this $15 per metric ton disadvantage. The United States, before TPP was implemented, basically had 50% of the export market in Japan. Now that we are at this disadvantage, we're expecting that to drop to somewhere between 23 to 26%. So we're going to lose over half of our capacity in the Japanese market for not being a part of this trade agreement, which even makes the bilateral agreement with Japan even more important. So we continue to work with the administration on that. China. In all the years I have been in Washington, D.C., the last 3 to 4 years, this is the most emphasis I have ever really seen on China, and it's always needed to be there. They've always been a bad actor, whether we're talking about their production practices or what they are doing domestically with their programs. So there's 2 different fronts. One, let's talk just quickly about the WTO case that was brought on by the Obama administration and that the Trump administration has carried it forward. The United States sued China through the WTO, basically saying that the domestic programs they were running were in violation of the World Trade Organization. It came to the calculations that we put together is they were basically domestically subsidizing their producers to roughly about $10.40 a bushel. Now, yeah, and everybody, I saw several of you just blink. Who wouldn't like to have $10.40 a bushel for wheat? Most of us probably be happy with $5 or $4.75, but much less $10.40. This internal program that China had, we've calculated, is also costing you about $720 million of lost revenue a year. So the fact that this has been going for multiple years means that we're already in multiple billions of dollars of how much revenue the U.S. wheat grower has lost because China is domestically subsidizing their growers beyond what the WTO allows. The good news is about 3 weeks ago, the WTO came out with their first ruling on this case. It was in our favor. They agreed that China is not behaving according to WTO rules and that they need to come back and make domestic changes to their programs in order to come into compliance. Now, the next steps will be, I'd be shocked if China did not appeal this, and so then we'll have to go to the appellate body of the WTO, and so we're still looking at roughly an 18 to 24-month process, but the good news is that the first ruling was in our favor. So that's one part of the China problem. The second part, last year when we put the tariffs on, now, soybeans have been in the news, and I know many of you do rotation crops with soybeans here in Michigan. And every third, I mean, I can almost tell you ASA's talking points. I heard them enough. Every third row of soybeans goes to China. China is the largest consumer of soy meal. But you know what? China is also the fifth or sixth largest wheat market for the United States. They are the largest wheat consumer in the world. So when we put on the 232 and the 301 tariffs on aluminum and steel, the first thing China did is come back and put a 25% tariff on corn. They put a 25% tariff on wheat. That also disrupted some of our trade with Mexico. But the thing that it really did, we sold 0 bushels of wheat to China last year. We normally sell about $640 million worth of wheat to China each year. They normally start ordering their wheat between March and June. So we're sitting here in the middle of March in 2019. As of right now, China has made 0 requests for U.S. wheat. So if you take the $640 million last year that we lost in sales, and really if we don't start to see some buys, or they call them tenders, coming in between now and really I would say in April, May, I think it's safe to say that we're not going to sell any more wheat to China again this year. And as we continue to lose out to that market, you can guarantee cheaper wheat, though lower quality, from neighbors in the Black Sea and Russia are going to fill that void, and there's a chance that we might not ever get that market back. Tariffs 232 and 301. You've seen there's several different pieces of legislation out there. NAWG has not come in and directly backed one of them. There's some saying that they don't want the president to be able to automatically put on tariffs without going through Congress, but that is something that Congress voted away and gave their authority away on that decades ago. There's others that want to keep the president from being able to pull us out of agreements that we're already in. And then others just want the tariffs just to come off so that we can go back to our normal trading patterns that we've had. I don't see this issue going away anytime soon. I was actually at the White House about 4 weeks ago, and they have asked us to speak separately between 232 and 301 tariffs, and especially the USMCA agreement. But unfortunately, when you go up to the Hill, whether you're in a Democrat or Republican office or on the Senate or the House side, it doesn't matter. The first question that we always get is, how are we supposed to move this trade agreement forward if we still got these tariffs on both Mexico and Canada and China and other countries? And so it's very difficult to separate out those two issues. The administration has promised twice now that they would remove the tariffs. One, if we got a deal inked on the USMCA, so we did that. They did not remove the tariffs. And then if it was signed and ratified, which was done down in Argentina, even though they're not involved in the agreement. So we did sign USMCA. It was sent to Congress, and now and still the tariffs didn't come off. And so now the question that Congress is having is, if we pass this, is the administration for sure going to lift 232 and 301 tariffs off these other commodities like steel and aluminum or processed goods? So this is going to be an issue that continues to grow. We've got an excellent staff person, Molly O'Connor, who is on my team that follows trade for us. But I think this is going to be the key topic that we're going to continue to hear about this year. I'm watching my time over here. Am I going to 10:15? Okay, thank you. Other policies, waters of the U.S. or WOTUS. This is one of those words that won't ever go away. But one of the good things is when the Trump administration came in, one of the first things they did was repeal and pull back the old WOTUS agreement or WOTUS regulation, and then actually went out and met with farmers and farm groups and talked about how should we put forth this rule so that it is friendly to agriculture, but also doing what it's supposed to do of protecting clean water. And so we are glad to see the new rule coming out. We have been in close communication with the EPA as they continue to move forward on this, and think they've done a much better job of putting out a new regulation that is more science-based and less what I would say activist-based than the last administration. Wetland regulations we continue to work on. There's several big issues. You may have noticed about 2 weeks ago, PREA was passed, which is something that's very important for registration. And I'm sorry I haven't made it to all of the vendors yet today, but during the breaks I will make a point to come around and visit with all of you. But I saw Syngenta out there, so I know PREA is very important to them, and of course Bayer and any of your other major crop input companies that's coming up. Our other next fight is going to be on the Endangered Species Act, which is something that NAWG has been leading to pull a coalition together, not only of crop protection companies, but of other commodity organizations, to figure out how do we either pass legislation or get an MOU between the EPA and the FDA and USDA so that we can continue to move forward with getting new products to the market. I'm happy to discuss that in Q&A or sometime while I'm here today. It's not a new issue, but it is a hot issue now that the Farm Bill is done. Glyphosate. Glyphosate and Prop 65, they do call it the People's Republic of California. I do enjoy going out there on vacation. I don't think I could ever live out there because they have way too many rules and taxes. But Prop 65, for those of you who may not know, is a law that was passed in the early 80s that basically said if IARC, which is a third-party non-regulatory body based in France, of all places, if they come out and say that a chemical or a process is a possible carcinogenic, it must be labeled in the state of California. So there are crazy things that they have come out with, that bacon and burnt toast and coffee, all of these things are supposedly possible carcinogenics. And if that's true, then I'm going to be dead here really soon because I eat all of those and I usually burn my bagels. So, because I like them to be kind of crunchy. Prop 65, the National Association of Wheat Growers is the lead plaintiff on this out in the state of California. It's in federal court right now in Sacramento. I actually feel really good with the judge that we have. It was very clear when the state of California asked that the labeling go forward. Basically, they were going to make anything that was a baked good that contained flour was going to have to be labeled as a possible carcinogenic because it could have glyphosate or Roundup on it. Well, glyphosate, as many of you know, and if there's a Bayer rep here in the room, they can answer some additional questions for us. But as you know, glyphosate has been tested by every major industrialized country and every major industrialized country's EPA equivalent and food safety organization as one of the world's safest compounds that we have and one of the most important tools that we have in agriculture. So where are we at on the lawsuit? We are currently in what's called a stay, so they've kind of hit the pause button. There are 2 other lawsuits currently going on in California that deal with compelled speech, which is this mandatory labeling issue that Prop 65 would cause us to do. But the good thing is when the state of California came back and asked the judge that they wanted to go ahead and start labeling products or baked goods with this label, we came in and asked for an injunction saying until you've had an opportunity to hear all the science and the data on this, it is not fair nor right by scientific basis or judicial basis for you to demand this label when we don't have all the facts. The judge, in his response, agreed with us, with NAWG. The corn growers and soybean growers are also on there, but we're the lead. And we continue to work with our supply chain, the bakers and the millers, along with our crop input companies on moving forward. So 2 of the cases have already been settled. We're waiting on a case in Berkeley to be done, and then our case will come back up. But clearly Judge Schrub, who's been reading who's presiding over our case, it was very obvious that he read all the comments and information that we sent in, not only as NAWG, but as the coalition, because he used direct quotes in there, basically saying the state had no scientific evidence to base listing glyphosate under Prop 65. Next, other major issues we're going to be working on: infrastructure, whether it's dredging the Mississippi a little deeper, working on locks and dams, which is some of the things I used to do. Before I came over to the wheat growers, I was on Capitol Hill for 11 years, worked on the House Ag Committee for a while. We also are looking at the Columbia River and the salmon issue if you're heading out west, and then of course just other highways, captive rail, weights, and then hours when you can be hauling. These are all things that have been kind of ignored, not only by other organizations, but we just really haven't, as a country, been paying attention to our infrastructure for a long time, and we've seen what that has done predominantly to our ability to move commodities around. So this is going to be something that we continue to work on and start to put more emphasis on. And we know Congress is working on their transportation bill and infrastructure as we speak. So we will make sure that agriculture's voice is there. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And I think I have quit and enough time for a few questions if there are any, but I will be here for the whole meeting as well. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to such a large group of growers. This is probably one of the largest groups I've spoken to in quite a while. And so it's very encouraging to see how many of y'all have come out today to come to the, not only to the MSU University Extension's Research Center here, but also to listen and be a part of Michigan Wheat. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak and happy to take any of your questions. Yes, sir.
So Michigan wheat pretty much gets used up here. We can't ship wheat out to the Pacific area. That hurts us on the price. What about the growers out that way in the Columbia River that ship that way? Are they just stockpiling wheat then?
So
Another crop?
well, so our biggest, they're having to store a lot of their wheat, and not so much, it's not so much right now because of the Columbia River issue. That's pretty new of what's coming up with this, with the salmon. Their biggest problem is Japan was their number one market of everything. They sent out that direction. So the PNW, as we call it, the Pacific Northwest, which is Washington, Oregon, Idaho, as they start to harvest this year, we're expecting them to see a price decrease for the lack of availability of those Asian Pacific Rim markets that they've been used to being able to export to. So trade, again, is going to significantly impact that region and the part of the U.S. wheat industry. Yes, sir.
Trump's going to sign a trade agreement coming up?
The USMCA?
No, with China.
Oh, with China. I think if we can get something pulled together that agriculture is accepting, I do think that he will sign it. I don't think the problem is on our side. I think if China does what they have normally done, they're going to continually move the goalpost where we're never going to actually get to an agreement. And I don't know if we're going to get that done in the next 2 years or the next 6 years, depending on what this administration continues on or a new administration. I could really see China continuing to move the goalpost around until they find out what's going to happen to them under the WTO. So I think you're looking at another 18 or 24 months before they truly set down. I know we hear in the media they have verbally committed to buy more soybeans. I was hoping they would also throw some wheat in there, but they didn't. So until the WTO case is settled, I actually don't see them signing an official agreement. I do think you'll continue to see a lot of verbiage in the media, but that's about as good as the language is. It's in the media. It's not an actual agreement. Yes, sir.
You said that, like, down in Africa, how much potential do they have then for, like, portions?
So that's a good question, and I don't know. I don't have a specific number for you, but what I will tell you is that the question was in Africa. I mentioned Namibia, South Africa, as being new potential export markets for U.S. wheat. What we are seeing in Africa are two things. One, We're going to go back to China again. The Chinese government is going to Africa and buying up land left and right to produce food because they don't have enough land within their own country to produce enough food for their people. So they're buying land in Africa. Then you've got the EU coming down, talking to the African nations, saying you don't want any GMOs, you don't want any chemicals down here because they want to put their production systems more in line with their regulatory scheme, which is going to make it difficult for us to compete. And so what we are working on, especially in South Africa and some of the countries where their middle class is growing, is coming in and demonstrating why our production systems are not only the best, the safest, but meet their environment, not only standards, but what they have to deal with their dry, arid regions, so predominantly non-irrigated. Many of you probably remember Cape Town was under water restrictions. So we do have wheat varieties produced here in the United States that can grow in that kind of region. And so we see that as a potential market for not only for us to export, but for us to also go out there and help them develop industry for milling and baking so that we can export our wheat to them. But I will definitely talk to our U.S. wheat associates and see if I can't get more specific numbers about Africa and send them to Dave and Jody to send out to you. That's a good question, and I just don't know the number right now. Yes, sir.
What do you think are the chances of the U.S., Mexican, Canadian agreement being ratified?
I actually think they're pretty good. I think the Democrats on the House side know that if they want to maintain control of the House, they're going to have to pass this trade agreement. And I think there's already enough support in the Republican-controlled Senate, and then it would be really awkward for the president to veto his own agreement. I wouldn't put it past this president. I've stopped predicting what he's going to do because so far he's just a little different than the last few presidents I've had to work with. Here's what the Democrats are going to do. They're going to sit on this agreement as long as they possibly can to put more pressure not only on the Senate for other things they want, but also to put pressure on the administration to make changes, whether it's nominees or things like that. So when you've got members like Colin Peterson, which is who I used to work for, Blue Dog Democrat, saying you need to pass USMCA. He's also been ranked as the most conservative Democrat in the history of the House of Representatives. He and Nancy Pelosi don't agree on any policy, but she does let him lead on agriculture. And so they're going to wait to the 23rd hour, but I do think they'll pass it. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yes. So I saw that same segment. So the question was, last night on national news, many of you may have seen this, and I've already emailed it to the lawyers that are doing our case, about a jury in California awarding a gentleman for him saying that his lymphoma was caused by the use of Roundup. The difference between those cases and our case, now, in the public perception, nope, those cases are not doing us any good. But in the legal system, those cases are looking at the molecule itself of glyphosate and whether or not it had, each component of the molecule had something to do possibly with causing a disease. The science behind it says that is not the case. If you remember back a couple months ago, California jury again awarded a gentleman about $240 million in injuries, and Bayer came back and said, look, but you didn't actually prove anything. This was a jury of the peers, and so the court reduced it to $70 million, which is still a lot of money, but that goes back to demonstrating the science is not behind these cases. Our judicial case that we have, though, is on compelled speech. We're actually suing under the First Amendment, saying that the state of California is forcing us to say something on a label that's not true. So we have two very different cases, but your question is very legitimate because in the public perception, they don't see the difference between the two. And so as these litigations against Bayer continue to mount, we continue to work with them very closely to make sure that we can draw a distinction between the First Amendment compelled speech and labeling and these other individual litigations on the molecule itself. Sir?
How does glyphosate and wheat, is there Roundup Ready wheat that I don't know about, or why is wheat the lead?
So that's a good question. No, there is not glyphosate. There's not Roundup Ready wheat. Let me just be very clear. Let me repeat that again. There is not Roundup Ready wheat available anywhere in the world. It is used in some of our northern states to help control weeds, and there's a residue issue that continues to keep coming up. So we've been working very close with the bakers and the millers on this issue. The problem that we have is we don't know exactly where it's all coming from, because really glyphosate in the wheat industry is only used in about 3 different states, but yet it's showing up in states that don't use it at all. And so what we're worried about is, as these activist groups like Moms for America, and if there was some way, for those of you on Twitter, if we could get rid of Food Babe and block her, because she's clearly just trying to generate fear-mongering, that they aren't testing everything that goes into all these different baked goods. So the chances that it's all coming from wheat is none. I mean, because of the small amount that we use in the industry, and it's predominantly even further northwest. Well, you can't really get much further than Michigan, so it's more west from here. But it is an issue that we continue to work on. You also have to understand, too, that our ability, if you think back, so I used to do livestock issues a long time ago. If you think back about 10 years ago when we had the Tops meat recall, so it was the largest meat recall in the history of the United States, the ability to test now down to parts per billion. I don't have a PhD behind my name, but I know there's several in this room. They can stand up and talk about this. Parts per billion, we're talking taking your little drop and cutting it into a billion pieces that we can find, we can find one that has glyphosate in it. And all of our EPA and FDA standards are in parts per million. That's a very big, significant difference. And so we have to remember that as we increase our technology and ability to test, that zero is not a reasonable goal in anything, whether we're talking about food safety or if we're talking about residue on crops or things that we're going to find in either unfinished or finished processed food items. Zero is unrealistic, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you're also consumers, and it's your other consuming friends who are not in agriculture that need to hear that message. And so I tell you what, I'm more than happy to answer questions. I see Dave standing up. I must be done. But I will be here until we adjourn today and walking through the hall. Thank you for your time again. Thank you for the excellent questions.
Thank you, Chandler, and some very good questions. Just a quick comment before we go to break. When Chandler had the slide up there about the U.S. wheat and barley scab initiative, I think just a little update in the Farm Bill. It has been funded at $10 million, and it's now increased to $15 million. And along with the Head Scab Initiative program, there's a thing called the National Wheat Improvement Committee, who basically lobbies for that and helps manage the funds, made up of researchers and growers from around the wheat growing areas of the United States. But we also happen to have a new chairman of that group sitting with us today, and that's Eric Olson, who next week takes over as chairman of that group. So we're very proud to have Eric, and it's very good for Michigan to have Eric in that situation. We certainly appreciate the extra $5 million, and actually that Head Scab, and originally some of that original money was Michigan was very important in the implementation of that original money, so we need to thank a few of our legislators here for that. Anyway, enough of that. We have time for a break here, restrooms, and go see the vendors, and we'll be back here at 10:55. Thank you.